The tomato field woke up slowly, as if it had all the time in the world. Before the sun fully rose, the air rested gently over the land, cool and quiet. A thin mist hovered just above the rows of tomato plants, moving only when a light breeze passed through. The plants stood in long, patient lines, their leaves heavy with dew, their fruit glowing faintly in shades of soft red and green. Nothing rushed here. The workers arrived one by one, their footsteps calm and unhurried. No voices were raised. No greetings were loud. They nodded to one another, familiar faces meeting again in the early light. These were people who had shared many mornings together, and words were rarely needed. Elena was the first to reach the far end of the field. She placed her basket on the ground and stretched her fingers slowly, as if waking them up. She had learned long ago that hands needed time, just like the day itself. She bent down and touched the soil, dark and cool, breathing in its quiet scent. The tomatoes waited. Nearby, Matteo adjusted his hat and looked across the field. From this angle, the plants seemed to stretch endlessly, row after row fading into the morning haze. He liked this moment best, the moment before work truly began, when everything felt possible and nothing demanded attention yet. A bird crossed the sky, alone and steady, when the sun finally appeared. It did not rush in. It spread its light gently, warming the leaves one by one. Drops of dew slid from the tomato vines and fell silently into the soil below. The field responded with a subtle shift, a quiet readiness. The workers began. They moved slowly, bending and straightening in a rhythm that matched their breathing. Hands reached into the leaves, fingers finding ripe tomatoes by touch more than sight. Each fruit was twisted carefully, placed into baskets with soft, dull sounds. No one counted. No one hurried. Time behaved differently here. The sounds of the field were simple and repeated, leaves brushing against sleeves, baskets settling onto the ground. Distant insects humming. Occasionally, someone would pause, straighten their back, and look toward the horizon where the land met the pale sky. Elena noticed how the light changed the tomatoes as the morning grew older. Some appeared deeper red now, others still held on to green shadows. She liked that nothing ripened all at once. It made the work feel endless, but in a comforting way. Matteo hummed quietly, a tune without words. It rose and fell like breathing, like the movement of hands in the vines. The others did not comment. The sound blended naturally into the field. As the hours passed, the mist disappeared, lifting without announcement. The air warmed, but not enough to feel heavy. Sweat formed slowly, honestly, without discomfort. The workers wiped their brows and continued. There was no clock visible from the field, only the sun, climbing patiently, only the rows, repeating endlessly, only the quiet work, steady and calm. By late morning, baskets began to fill. Red shapes rested against one another, round and smooth, holding the warmth of the sun. The workers gathered briefly at the edge of the field, sitting on overturned crates, sipping water in silence. No one spoke of the day ahead, no one spoke of the day behind them. They simply rested, listening to the field breathe, and when they stood again, they returned to the rows. As if drawn back by something gentle and familiar, something that did not need to be named, the tomato field remained patient, and the day, still young, continued without hurry. The sun climbed higher, though it did so without urgency. its warmth settled gently on the backs of the workers, spreading evenly across the field. The tomatoes absorbed the light, their skins growing warmer beneath the leaves. Shadows shortened, pulling closer to the plants, as if resting there. Work continued in the same steady rhythm. Elena moved down her row without counting steps. Her hands knew where to go, how to part the leaves, how to find the fruit hidden beneath. Some tomatoes were heavy and full, others still firm and small. She accepted them as they were, leaving some behind, taking others with care. The basket at her feet slowly gained weight. Nearby, Matteo paused for a moment, standing upright and closing his eyes. He felt the heat on his face, not sharp, not tiring, just present. He breathed in, then out, letting the moment pass through him. When he bent again, his movements were just as calm as before. No one hurried because there was nowhere else to be. The field stretched quietly around them, unchanged, familiar. Rows repeated themselves until they blurred into a single pattern of green and red. Occasionally, a cloud drifted across the sun, cooling the air for a brief moment. The workers noticed, but did not react. They continued, trusting the sun to return, and it always did. The sound of insects grew slightly louder as the morning moved toward midday. A low hum filled the space between the rows, soft and continuous. It was not distracting. It blended with the slow movements, the steady breathing, the gentle touch of hands on leaves. Elena thought of nothing in particular. Her mind rested in the simple actions: reach, twist, place. Reach, twist, place. The repetition felt endless, but not empty. It was full in a quiet way, like the sound of wind through tall grass. Matteo noticed a tomato shaped slightly differently than the others. It curved gently, imperfect but bright. He held it for a moment longer before placing it in his basket, feeling its warmth against his palm. He smiled faintly, then returned to the row. Small moments passed without being noticed. Sweat darkened the fabric of shirts and hats, appearing slowly, honestly. No one complained. Water bottles were lifted, tilted, then set down again. The taste of water was plain and welcome. Time continued to loosen its grip. At the far end of the field, two workers exchanged a brief glance and a nod. Nothing more was needed. They understood the pace, the silence, the shared agreement to move gently through the hours. The sun reached its highest point and rested there, watching. Shadows grew thin and light nearly flattened the colors of the field. Red tomatoes glowed softly, leaves shimmered faintly, and the soil held its quiet warmth. The world felt simple, reduced to a few essential elements: hands, leaves, breath, light. When the heat grew slightly heavier, the workers slowed without discussion. Movements became smaller, pauses longer. No one pushed against the day. They allowed it to unfold in its own time. Elena sat briefly at the end of her row, resting her hands in her lap. She listened to her own breathing and to the hum of the field. Nothing demanded her attention. Nothing pulled her thoughts away. Matteo leaned against a crate, feeling the steady ground beneath his feet. He looked across the rows and felt the familiar calm settle deeper inside him. The sun remained above them, steady and quiet, and the tomato field continued to hold them, gently, as the day moved forward without resistance. By early afternoon, the field felt older, as if it had lived many days inside this single one. The light softened slightly, losing its sharpness. Colors returned to their deeper tones, reds growing richer, greens settling into calm shadows. A gentle breeze moved through the rows, lifting the leaves just enough to remind them they were not alone. The workers continued, slower now, their hands carried memory. They no longer thought about how to move. Fingers parted leaves without effort, wrists turned tomatoes free with ease. Each action followed the last naturally, like a familiar path walked many times before. Elena noticed how her body worked without instruction. She did not guide her hands, she followed them. There was comfort in this surrender, in letting the work lead instead of the mind. Her thoughts drifted like clouds, forming and dissolving without weight. The basket beside her filled, then was replaced with an empty one. Matteo worked in near silence, his humming fading into breath alone. He felt the repetition settle him, grounding him in the present moment. There was no beginning and no end to the task, only continuation. Somewhere beyond the field, something moved. A distant sound, faint and unimportant. It passed without drawing attention. The air carried the smell of warm soil and crushed leaves. It was not strong. But it lingered gently, wrapping itself around the workers like a familiar blanket. Breathing felt deeper, slower, the tomato plant swayed slightly, brushing against sleeves and arms. Their touch was soft, almost careful. Leaves bent and returned to place, unbothered by the passing hands. Time slipped quietly. Elena paused to stretch her back, standing still for a moment longer than necessary. She looked down her row, then across the field. From here, everything looked the same as it had hours ago, and yet subtly different. Baskets had moved. Shadows had shifted. The day had changed without asking permission. Matteo knelt briefly, adjusting a plant that had leaned too far into the path. He straightened it gently, pressing the soil around its base. The plant remained upright, calm and steady. No one spoke of small kindnesses like this. A bird landed at the edge of the field, hopping once, then again. It watched the workers without fear, then lifted off just as quietly. Its wings cut through the air, leaving no trace behind. The heat eased further, allowing longer pauses. Water was shared again, passed from hand to hand without words. The simple act felt generous, even familiar. Elena closed her eyes as she drank, listening to the faint hum around her. When she opened them, nothing had changed, and that felt reassuring. The baskets grew heavier. But the workers did not. Their movements remained gentle, their pace unchanged. Effort existed, but it did not demand attention. It was simply there, like the steady ground beneath their feet. The afternoon stretched, sunlight angled slightly now, touching the field from the side instead of above. Leaves cast longer shadows, patterns forming and dissolving as the breeze passed through. Matteo noticed the shift and smiled softly, not because it meant something, but because it felt right. Elena returned to her row, hands reaching into the leaves once more. The familiar rhythm welcomed her back: reach, turn, release. The tomato field accepted everything without comment. And the day continued, slowly folding into itself, calm and unbroken. The light no longer stood still, it leaned gently across the field, stretching shadows into long, quiet shapes. The sun lowered without drama, as if it had agreed to leave slowly. Warmth remained, but it softened, settling into the soil and the leaves instead of pressing down from above. The workers felt the change without speaking, their movements slowed even more, guided now by the angle of the light. Hands reached into cooler shade beneath the leaves, where the tomatoes rested in calm darkness. The air touched the skin differently, lighter, more forgiving. Elena noticed the first long shadow crossing her row. It moved steadily, patient, marking time without sound. She followed its progress briefly, then returned to her work, comforted by its quiet presence. Matteo adjusted his basket, shifting its weight from one hand to the other. The tomatoes inside had absorbed the day's warmth. They felt alive, holding the memory of sunlight. The field breathed more deeply, insects softened their hum, lowering it into the background. The breeze returned, slightly cooler now, lifting the edges of sleeves and leaves. It moved through the rows like a slow whisper, leaving everything just a little more relaxed. Work continued without expectation. Some tomatoes were now harder to see as shadows deepened. The workers relied more on touch than sight. Fingers brushed smooth skins, felt firmness and warmth, judged ripeness through memory rather than thought. Elena liked this part of the day best. It asked less of the eyes and more of the body. She trusted her hands completely, allowing them to guide her through the vines. Each movement felt familiar, as if repeated over many days, many seasons. Matteo paused and looked toward the horizon. The sky there held soft colors, faded blue, pale gold, hints of something warmer waiting beyond. He did not name them. He simply observed, letting the view settle into him. No one spoke of stopping, yet everyone felt it approaching. The baskets filled more slowly now. The work grew quieter, gentler, as if both people and field were preparing for rest. The soil cooled beneath their feet, holding the day's warmth just a little longer. A distant sound drifted across the land, then disappeared. It carried no meaning, demanded no response. Elena stretched her fingers again, rolling her shoulders back. There was a pleasant heaviness in her arms, not painful, just full. She welcomed it, knowing it would fade with rest. Matteo placed his last tomato into the basket and stood still for a moment. He did not move right away. He listened. The field answered with silence. Shadows continued to grow, weaving together between the rows. Light slipped lower, thinner now, touching the tops of the plants before letting go. The workers gathered slowly, unhurried, at the edge of the field. They set their baskets down in neat lines, red surfaces glowing softly in the fading light. No one counted, no one measured. They stood together briefly, breathing in the cooling air. Faces were calm, eyes heavy but peaceful. The day had given what it could, and it had been enough. As they turned to leave, the tomato field remained behind them, quiet and complete. The light continued to lean, and evening waited, open and patient. Evening did not arrive suddenly. It slipped into the field between moments, settling softly over the rows. The sky dimmed without losing its warmth, and the air grew cooler in small, gentle steps. Colors faded slowly, as if the land were exhaling after a long day. The workers returned to the field's edge, moving with calm familiarity. Some carried baskets, others walked empty-handed, their arms loose at their sides. Footsteps pressed lightly into the soil, leaving shallow marks that would disappear by morning. No one felt the need to speak. Elena noticed how the tomatoes looked different now. In the softer light, their red was deeper, quieter. Shadows wrapped around them like protection. She ran her fingers lightly over the rim of a basket, feeling the smooth shapes beneath her hand. Matteo sat on a low crate and removed his hat, resting it on his knee. His hair held the warmth of the day. He tilted his face upward, letting the cooling air touch his skin. It felt like relief without effort. The field changed its voice. The hum of insects softened further, breaking into small, separate sounds. Somewhere nearby, something rustled briefly, then grew still. The breeze moved slower now, as if it, too, was tired. The workers sat together in quiet rows. Water bottles were passed again, lifted and lowered without sound. The simple act felt final. As if it closed something gently rather than ending it. The taste of water lingered longer in the mouth. Elena leaned back slightly, resting her weight on her hands. She looked up at the sky, now holding faint traces of light. The day seemed far away already, even though it had not fully left. Matteo watched the shadows merge into one another between the plants. Lines softened, edges disappeared. The field became a single shape, calm and unified. Time slowed further. No one checked the hour. No one wondered what came next. The present moment expanded, wide and forgiving, holding them all without pressure. A distant sound of evening life drifted in, faint, unimportant, and quickly gone. It did not interrupt the stillness. It belonged to it. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Behind her eyelids, the rhythm of the day repeated itself, bending, reaching, lifting, breathing. The images faded into simple sensations: warmth, weight, calm. When she opened her eyes again, she felt lighter. Matteo stretched his legs slowly, feeling the ground beneath him. The soil was cooler now, steady and familiar. He pressed his heel into it gently, grounding himself in the moment. The sky darkened by another shade. The last warmth of the sun rested low on the horizon, touching the field with a soft farewell. Leaves no longer shimmered. They rested. The workers stood one by one, gathering what needed to be carried and leaving the rest behind. There was no rush to leave, but no reason to stay longer either. As they walked away, the field did not feel empty, it felt settled. The tomato plant stood quietly in the dim light, holding the memory of hands and warmth. The soil released the heat it had kept all day. Evening completed its gentle arrival, and night waited nearby, calm and open. Night arrived quietly, without asking for attention. It moved in gently, filling the spaces left behind by the fading light. The sky deepened into softer shades, and the field became a place of outlines rather than details. Shapes remained, but they no longer asked to be named. The workers had gone, only the field remained, holding the echo of their presence. The soil was warm beneath the cooling air, releasing the day slowly, patiently. Leaves rested against one another, no longer stirred by hands. The tomato plant stood still. Somewhere nearby, a night insect began its steady call. The sound was simple and repeated, spreading evenly across the darkness. It did not interrupt the silence, it completed it. The rows were barely visible now, but they were still there, known rather than seen. Each plant occupied its place without question, rooted and calm. A breeze passed through the field, slower than before. It brushed the tops of the plants lightly, like a careful hand. Leaves responded with a soft whisper, then settled again. The tomatoes cooled gradually. They released the warmth they had gathered during the day, sharing it with the night air. Their skins dulled, no longer reflecting light, but holding it quietly within. the field breathed, inhale, exhale, the rhythm was steady and unhurried. Nothing moved quickly. Nothing needed to. Far above, the sky darkened fully. The last colors faded into a deep, even tone. There was no sharp edge between evening and night, only a gentle blending. The ground felt heavier now, more present. The soil held its shape, its memory. Footprints left by the workers softened as the earth relaxed, time loosened completely, minutes stretched without shape. Moments overlapped, indistinguishable from one another. The night did not count them, the insect call continued, unchanging. It filled the space between plants, between breaths, between thoughts. It asked for nothing and offered calm in return. A small movement stirred near the edge of the field. Something passed briefly, unseen, then disappeared. The field accepted it without reaction. The tomato plants remained patient, their leaves folded slightly inward, resting. Stems held firm. Roots reached deeper into the soil, steady and quiet, anchoring everything above. The air cooled further. Gently, dew began to form again, tiny and unnoticed. It gathered on leaves and fruit, repeating the cycle from the morning before. Nothing felt new. Nothing felt old. The field existed simply as it was. No work remained, no effort lingered, only the slow presence of night, settling in fully now, wrapping the land in stillness. The tomato field rested. And in its rest, it held the promise of another unhurried day, waiting quietly for the light to return. The night settled fully over the field. Darkness no longer felt like an arrival, but a state of being. The tomato rows rested beneath the open sky, their shapes softened, their edges quiet. What could not be seen was still there, complete and patient. Above the field, stars appeared slowly, they did not rush into place. One by one, they revealed themselves, scattered gently across the sky. Their light was faint but steady, touching the land without waking it. The field did not respond, it remained still, grounded, breathing slowly beneath the night air. Dew thickened on the leaves, gathering weight until it rested heavily, ready to fall. A single drop slipped from a tomato vine and disappeared into the soil below. The sound was small, almost imagined. The insect call continued, steady and even. It carried through the rows, threading the plants together with sound. The rhythm was simple and predictable, a quiet guide through the darkness. The tomato plants leaned slightly toward one another, not from wind, but from rest. Their leaves curved inward, protecting the fruit beneath. The tomatoes waited in shadow, round and cool now, holding no urgency. They existed only in the present moment, unchanged by thought. The soil cooled further, firm and calm. It held the roots securely, absorbing the moisture of the night. Each plant remained connected, unseen network stretching quietly beneath the surface. Sharing water, sharing stillness, time felt distant. It moved somewhere beyond the field, unnoticed and unimportant. Here, moments did not pass, they simply existed, overlapping gently like slow breaths. A cloud crossed the sky, briefly dimming the stars. The field did not notice. When the stars returned, their light felt softer than before, as if filtered through sleep. Shadows shifted slightly, then settled again into familiar shapes. Nothing stirred. The air rested evenly across the land, cool but not cold. It wrapped the field in a calm that felt complete, without edges. Somewhere far away, another sound rose and faded, a night call answered by silence. It did not travel far. It did not stay, the tomato field remained unchanged. Rose lay quietly beneath the stars, waiting without expectation. Leaves held dew. Soil held warmth. The night held everything else, and within that stillness, the field slept, not deeply, not lightly, but steadily, as if it had always known how. This was the quietest hour. The night had reached its deepest point, where sound felt distant and unnecessary. Even the insects had softened their voices, leaving wide spaces of silence between each call. The field existed in pauses rather than motion. Nothing stirred. The tomato plants remained still beneath the dark sky, their forms barely distinguishable from the shadows around them. Dew rested heavily now, coating leaves and fruit in a thin, cool layer. The weight of it pulled gently downward, grounding everything further into rest. The soil felt dense and secure. It held the roots without effort, offering stability without tension. Beneath the surface, moisture traveled slowly, evenly, guided by quiet pathways formed long ago. The earth worked silently, without instruction. The air felt balanced, not cool, not warm, just present. A faint breeze passed through once, barely noticeable. It touched the tops of the plants lightly, then moved on. Leaves shifted a fraction, releasing a few drops of dew that fell softly and disappeared into the ground. Silence returned. The sky above held fewer stars now, not because they were gone, but because the eyes no longer searched for them. Darkness felt complete without them. Time loosened even further. There was no sense of before or after. The field existed in a single, unbroken moment. Everything that had happened during the day, hands, movement, warmth, felt distant and unreal, like a memory from another life. The tomato plants waited, but not for anything specific. They waited the way the night waits, without anticipation, without desire. Their stillness was not emptiness, but fullness, a quiet holding of energy yet to return. The air carried the faint scent of leaves and damp soil. It lingered gently, familiar and calming. Breathing felt slower here, deeper, as if the land itself were guiding it. Somewhere far away, a sound began and ended before it fully arrived. The field did not react. It had no need to. This hour belonged entirely to rest, to weightlessness, to silence that felt kind rather than empty. The tomato field remained unchanged, steady in the darkness. Every plant, every row, every root held its place without effort, and slowly, so slowly it could not be measured, the night began to prepare for its release, though nothing yet suggested that morning would ever return. Nothing announced the coming of morning. There was no sound, no color, no clear change. Only a subtle shift in the air, so gentle it could be missed entirely. The night did not end. It loosened its hold. The tomato field remained still. Dew clung to leaves and fruit, heavier now, complete in its quiet work. The soil beneath held moisture and warmth together, balanced and calm. Everything rested exactly where it had been for hours, and yet, something softened. The darkness grew thinner, not brighter, just less dense. Shapes began to separate slightly from one another. Rows that had blended into shadow slowly remembered their form. The field did not wake. It hovered between states. The insect calls faded further, stretching the silence into longer, wider spaces. What remained was not emptiness, but pause, the kind that exists just before a breath is taken. Above the field, the sky shifted almost imperceptibly. It did not brighten, it lightened. A hint of something pale rested far beyond the horizon, too distant to be named. It did not reach the field yet. It only suggested that the night was no longer alone. The tomato plants stayed folded inward, holding their fruit protectively. Leaves curved gently, still cool, still damp. A few drops of dew slipped free and fell quietly into the soil, completing their short journey. The ground accepted them without sound, roots rested deep and secure. They sensed the change before anything else, not as light, but as timing. As readiness. As a quiet understanding that rest was nearly complete, time began to return, not in minutes or hours, but in direction. The field remained motionless, but it no longer felt suspended. It felt held, as if something beyond it had gently placed a hand beneath the night and begun to lift. The air cooled slightly, then steadied. Breathing felt easier, wider, more open. The scent of soil and leaves lingered, unchanged but clearer somehow. Nothing moved yet, no birds called, no footsteps approached. The workers were still far away, still sleeping, still untouched by the coming day. The tomato field waited, not eagerly, not passively, simply ready, and in that quiet readiness, before light fully remembered how to return, the night released its final breath. The day returned without announcement. Light did not arrive all at once. It spread slowly, gently, as if remembering the field rather than discovering it. The sky softened into pale shades, and the darkness lifted without resistance. The tomato field remained quiet, dew covered every surface now, complete and shining faintly. Leaves bent under its weight, releasing droplets that fell into the soil below. The ground drank them in, patient and ready. Rows emerged clearly, plants stood where they always had, unchanged by the night. The tomatoes rested beneath the leaves, cool and full, waiting without urgency. Nothing felt new, and nothing felt old. A bird crossed the sky. Steady and alone, the air carried the calm of early morning. It touched the field lightly, stirring leaves just enough to wake them. A breeze moved through the rows, slow and careful, like a hand brushing across familiar ground. The field breathed. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun prepared to rise fully. Its warmth had not arrived yet, but its presence could be felt, quiet and certain. The soil held the memory of yesterday. It remembered footsteps, weight, warmth. It remembered hands reaching and baskets filling. None of it was gone. It had simply settled, becoming part of the land. The tomato plants unfolded slowly, leaves lifted, stems straightened. And fruit shifted slightly as the field adjusted to the returning light. Dew slipped away in small, silent drops, leaving behind clean surfaces and gentle shine. Time began again, not with urgency, but with permission. The field did not hurry the day forward. It allowed it to arrive in its own way, just as it had allowed the night to leave. In the distance, the first signs of movement appeared, faint, unimportant, still far away. The workers would return soon, just as they always did. There was no need to think about it yet, for now, the field existed in the moment between rest and work, between night and morning, between ending and beginning. The sun lifted higher, spreading warmth across the rows once more. Tomatoes absorbed the light. Leaves shimmered softly. The soil warmed beneath the surface. Everything returned, not as repetition, but as continuation. the tomato field stood ready, calm and patient, holding space for another unhurried day, and the work, gentle, quiet, familiar, waited without asking to begin.